as we continue with our discussion of the law of supply, we find the portion that talks about those determinants of supply. Determinants of supply are those big picture kinds of things that, when changed, really cause business owners to change what they're doing. They're either going to put much, much more out there for sale, or they're going to put much, much less out there for sale. Now, our authors talk about the determinants of supply in these 5 areas. We're going to talk about the price of resources. We're going to talk about technology and productivity kind of going hand in hand. We're going to talk about the prices of related goods. We're going to talk about expectations, and we're going to talk about the numbers of sellers. And again, each one of these things are those types of things that, when changed, cause us to see big, big changes in what happens. Now, very often as I read these books, I see discussions about the way in which the supply curve will shift. And this is a good thing to keep in mind, because the picture, once again, looks very, very different when one of these determinants of supply changes, as opposed to something that deals with the law of supply. When we looked at the law of supply, we found that a change in either the price of or the quantity supplied will cause a movement along the supply curve. Now, when we talk about a change that deals with one of those determinants of supply, we're going to see the entire curve shift. And again, I try to picture this as you do in the video. This was our original supply curve. When supply increases, we would say that there is a shift right. And when you're drawing this, if you do this by hand, again, remember, it doesn't really matter how far to the right you go. If we had time to survey everybody, we would know exactly where that goes. But for purposes of doing our homework, as long as you're showing that supply curve shifting to the right, then we know that supply has gone up. More is available at every particular price. So, for example, originally when we were talking to a store owner, at $1, this person would put just 10 of these out for sale. Now at $1, they're putting about 35 of them out for sale. At $2, we used to see 20 of these things on the shelves. Now at $2, we're seeing about 40. We could follow that through and find that at every possible price, more is made available. Now, the converse, what happens when supply goes down? We show that as a shift left of the supply curve. And again, when you're doing your graphing, it doesn't matter how far left it goes. As long as it goes left, that's going to tell us that business owners, for one reason or another, have decided to put much, much less out at every possible price. Okay, so now there are the basics. Now we can begin talking about some real-life examples. Our authors started by talking about price of resources, so I'm going to kind of follow that discussion through. Price of resources really talks about our cost of doing business. Think about the things that you would have to spend money on to keep the store up and running. You've got to pay your employees, you've got to pay to light and heat the building, you've got to pay insurance, you've got to pay fuel costs, you've got to pay for many, many things. This is what we know happens when the price of resources rises. We're going to find supply going down because it costs so much more to pay for gas. We've experienced that recently. You have less overall money available to put things in your store. And we would say a decrease in supply is illustrated as a shift left. Now, another way to think about this shift left is this. Sometimes when supply changes, that increase in gas is going to be passed on to you and I. Or the increase in maybe the soda in your restaurant is going to be passed on to the consumer. So we can interpret that supply curve shifting left in 2 ways, really. Number one, we can talk about it as a reduction in the amount of things that are available. Or if we follow along, we can see prices going up as that shifts to the left. So, when the price of resources increases, we have less money available to do what we're doing, and supply is going to go down. If we're lucky, gas prices drop, and we find they get cut in half. It's easier to pay for things to get to our store. We have more money available to put the hats in the store that you're selling. We have more money available to make meals in the restaurant that you own. When the price of resources drops, overall supply is going to go up. And again, we're going to call that a shift right. So number one, price of resources. Number two, our authors talked about technology, productivity, kind of going hand in hand. And this is maybe a little bit different way of thinking about technology than what you've been used to. Yes, technology just does talk about some of those advancements that we've seen recently, like our ability to process information through the power of computing technology, allowing people to be much more productive. Yes, we've seen machinery that can do much, much more than we've found it able to do in the past. When technology improves in that sense, we're able to put much more out on the shelves for the same price. We say that supply will increase. In another sense, in economic terms, if our inputs, the labor, the capital, the land, are able to do much, much more, then we're going to be able to see that supply curve shifting to the right. Once again, of course, the converse is true too. When those inputs aren't as effective, when our people can't do as much, our machinery can't do as much, or technology is no longer available for one reason or another, then we're going to see supply fall. We're going to see a decrease in supply, and that's going to be illustrated as a shift left of the supply curve. What might cause technology to be unavailable? Well, there can be little things like breakdowns through the day of the machinery, but I'm thinking in bigger terms of something like a frost that hits southern Florida and wipes out a bunch of the crops. The land is no longer available for use. We're going to see overall supply of food go down. Living here in the Midwest, we see floods every year. We're watching river stages along the Mississippi. Think of all the land that gets flooded year after year that farmers are no longer able to use. Think about all of the factories along the banks of the river that suddenly find themselves under 5 feet of water. All of those resources are no longer available, and so of course we're not going to be able to do as much, and supply is going to decrease. Well, determinants of supply, price of resources, productivity, technology. Take a look back through your book about that, and in a minute we're going to pick up a couple other of those determinants of supply.